May 12, 1885. The village of Batoche, district of Saskatchewan. The air is thick with the acrid stench of black powder and the copper tang of blood. On a jagged ridge overlooking the South Saskatchewan River, a line of men crouch in hand-dug pits. They are the Métis, the children of the wilderness, and they are running out of time. Below them, the steady, rhythmic thud of a Gatling gun tears through the spring silence. In the center of the chaos stands a man clutching not a rifle, but a large wooden crucifix. His eyes are wild, reflecting a fire that is part religious ecstasy and part desperate defiance. This is Louis Riel. To the men in the trenches, he is a prophet of a new world. To the 800 British Canadian redcoats charging up the slope with bayonets fixed, he is a madman. The charge is a crimson wave. The Métis fire their last rounds not bullets, but stones and nails. For a moment, the unstoppable momentum of the Canadian state wavers. If the First Nations tribes to the north join the fray now, the Canadian Pacific Railway is severed. The West is lost, and the dream of a unified Canada dies in the mud of Batoche, but the silence from the north is deafening. As the first bayonet pierces the perimeter, the question remains, was this a holy war for survival, or a calculated suicide by a man who had lost his mind? Shadows of the Prairies. The rise and fall of Louis Riel, the year 1885, found the North American continent at a crossroads of iron and blood. Its northern neighbor, the young Dominion of Canada, faced an existential crisis. The vast interior of the Great Plains was a vacuum of power. For centuries, this land belonged to the Buffalo, the Cree, the Blackfoot, and the Métis, a distinct people of mixed indigenous and European ancestry. But the world was shrinking. The Industrial Revolution demanded land. The Canadian government in Ottawa, led by Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald, had a singular vision, a transcontinental railway that would bind the Atlantic to the Pacific. To Macdonald, the West was a commodity. To the people living there, it was a sanctuary. By 1884, the Buffalo were gone, replaced by the survey lines of government agents. The Métis were being pushed off their riverlot farms, their titles ignored by a distant bureaucracy. The military balance was deceptively lopsided. On one side, a modern state with a professional militia. On the other, a scattered resistance of hunters and warriors fighting for their homes. Yet, the geography favored the rebel. The Canadian West was a trackless wilderness, where an army could starve before it ever found its enemy. The spark was lit by a ghost from the past. Louis Riel was a man haunted by his own legend. 15 years earlier, he had led a successful uprising at Red River, forcing Canada to create the province of Manitoba. But that victory came at a price. The execution of an orange man named Thomas Scott, which made Riel a pariah in English-speaking Canada. He spent years in exile in the United States, battling bouts of mental instability and religious delusions. He came to believe he was the prophet of the New World, a divinely appointed leader. When a delegation of Métis arrived in Montana in 1884, begging him to return, Riel saw it as a divine calling. He was a charismatic orator, stirring the souls of the weary. But he was also a man of fractures. His counterpart, Gabriel Dumont, was Riel's physical opposite. Dumont was the greatest buffalo hunter of the Agyeman of iron herbs, a crack shot, and a master of the petite guerre or guerrilla warfare. Dumont understood the terrain. Riel understood the spirit. It was a partnership destined for glory or ruin. Opposing them was Major-General Frederick Middleton, a British officer of the old school. Middleton viewed the Métis as mere half-breeds and the First Nations as sabotages. He was cautious, methodical, and deeply underestimated the tactical brilliance of his enemies. While Riel prayed for a miracle, Middleton relied on the cold logic of Victorian logistics. By March 1885, the diplomacy of petitions had failed. Riel declared a provisional government. The intelligence failures of the Northwest Mounted Police were catastrophic. They failed to realize the depth of the Métis resolve until the first shots rang out. At the Battle of Duck Lake, a small force of police and volunteers walked into a textbook ambush orchestrated by Dumont. In less than 30 minutes, the government forces were routed, leaving 12 dead. The shockwaves hit Ottawa like a thunderclap. Macdonald, facing a bankrupt railway and a political revolt, saw an opportunity in the tragedy. He would use the rebellion to justify the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway. In a feat of military mobilization that defied the technology of the era, he dispatched over 5,000 troops. Utilizing the unfinished gaps in the railway, soldiers traveled by sleigh and on foot through sub-zero temperatures, moving more men in 10 days than had been thought possible in months. The geography of the conflict was a nightmare for the invaders. The North Saskatchewan River Valley offered endless opportunities for ambush. Dumont pushed for a campaign of terror, burning the railway, harassing supply lines, and picking off officers. But here, the psychological rift between the leaders became a strategic anchor. Riel, fearing the shedding of too much Christian blood and believing God would intervene, forbade Dumont from utilizing his full guerrilla potential. He insisted on a defensive war, tethering his mobile fighters to fixed positions. The climax began at Fish Creek in late April. Dumont, with only 200 men, checked Middleton's advance of 900. The Métis used coulees deep ravines to vanish and reappear, sowing panic. Middleton, humbled by the resistance, stalled for weeks. This was the moment of maximum peril. To the west, the Cree leader Poundmaker had defeated a government column at Cutknife Hill. If the Métis and the Cree united, the rebellion would have become a full-scale frontier war. But Riel's focus remained on Batoche. He turned the village into a fortress of rifle pits. On May 9th, Middleton arrived with the full weight of his northwest field force, including the battery of the Royal Canadian Artillery and the Moots-Field Gatling gun. For 4 days, the siege of Batoche was a stalemate. Métis, disciplined and invisible, repelled wave after wave of fire. The Gatling gun sprayed the ridgeline, but the defenders simply ducked. However, the logistics of a rebellion are fragile. The Métis were running out of lead. They began firing buttons, pebbles, and copper wire. On the 4th day, the stalemate broke not by Middleton's order, but by a breakdown in command. 2 colonels, frustrated by Middleton's hesitation, led a spontaneous bayonet charge. It was a moment of tactical chaos that turned into a strategic masterstroke. The Métis, exhausted and out of ammunition, could not stop a massed infantry rush. The defense collapsed. Batoche fell. The aftershock was immediate and brutal. The rebellion was decapitated. Riel surrendered on May 15th, walking calmly into the Canadian camp. Dumont, the warrior to the end, escaped through the woods, eventually fleeing to the United States to join Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. The casualty count was relatively low for a war, but the political casualties were astronomical. The leadership fallout centered on the trial of Louis Riel. It was a legal spectacle that polarized the nation. To Quebec, Riel was a hero. To Ontario, he was the murderer of Thomas Scott. Despite a plea for mercy from the jury, Macdonald was immovable. "He shall hang," the Prime Minister famously said, though every dog in Quebec barked in his favor. The critical mistake of the rebellion was not found on the battlefield, but in the psyche of its leader. Gabriel Dumont's tactical instinct to wage a mobile, aggressive guerrilla war could have lasted years, draining the Canadian treasury and perhaps forcing an independent Métis state. By tethering the movement to Riel's messianic visions and the static defense of Batoche, the Métis traded their greatest advantage, mobility, for a symbolic stand they could not win. Riel's belief that his cause was divinely protected led to a fatal overthrow that ignored the cold reality of rapid-fire weaponry and industrial logistics. The legacy of 1885 is written into the very map of North America. It marked the definitive end of the Old West and the closing of the frontier. The execution of Louis Riel on November 16, 1885, created a fracture between French and English Canada that persists to this day, fueling the fire of Quebec separatism for over a century. The First Nations involved were subjected to the pass system, a precursor to apartheid. In the annals of military history, the Northwest Rebellion stands as one of the first successful uses of a transcontinental railroad to project power across a vast distance, a precursor to the lightning mobilizations of the 20th century. It proved that in the age of the machine, the individual warrior, no matter how brave or spiritually certain, cannot withstand the relentless march of the state. Louis Riel remains a ghost in the Canadian psyche, a madman to some, a saint to others. But in the wind that sweeps across the South Saskatchewan River, one can still hear the echo of the Gatling gun and the defiant prayers of a people who dared to stand in the way of an empire.